21-7. Ohio State and Northwestern having about the same amount of total yards. Northwestern leading Ohio State 7-0 at the end of the first quarter. Total yards were 285 for Northwestern, 283 for the Ohio State Buckeyes. In a game that was very close until the fourth quarter when Mayan Williams finally punched it in with a 2-yard run. I could not have been more incorrect in my analysis outside of the part of Ohio State winning the game than I was yesterday. I had C.J. Stroud passing for around 300 yards, 4 touchdowns. He went 10 of 26 for 76 yards. And that right there is what'll happen there because of those stats is if Blake Corum has a big day or if Hendon Hooker has a fantastic day at Georgia, which right now at the time of this recording, Tennessee is down by 4. They're trailing 3-7 against Georgia in Athens. This opens up the door for other Heisman contenders to leapfrog ahead of C.J. Stroud. He had a 63 passer rating, didn't even complete 40% of his passes, and had 76 passing yards. And a lot of this was due to the wind and the rain. There were winds of 20 to 30 and more than that miles per hour on the field, windy, rainy. Northwestern's defense was very scrappy, their best defensive performance of the year, holding Ohio State to 21 points. Northwestern had another game similar to this against Penn State when they were in Happy Valley. It was rainy. They lost 17-7. The difference is in that game there were 8 combined turnovers, 3 from Northwestern, 5 from the Nittany Lions. This game had no turnovers. Northwestern led in TOP, 36 minutes and 26 seconds to Ohio State, 23 minutes and 34 seconds. Northwestern had 17 first downs to Ohio State's 13. Northwestern had 2 more total yards than OSU, 285 to 283, as I already mentioned. And the real difference maker here was fourth down. Northwestern 0 of 4 on fourth down. Ohio State 2 of 4. And Ohio State running the ball very effectively, especially toward the end, averaging 5.9 yards per carry on 35 rushing attempts for 207 rushing yards. Northwestern, they had an effective ground game early, 206 rushing yards, but they ran it all on 59 attempts, 3.5 yards per carry. Northwestern just not being able to get it done when it mattered most. They took the lead very early using, wildcat formations where Evan Hall, Cam Porter, Claire, where they were putting their running backs in there to take the direct snap, using Ben Sullivan for, quarterback runs. Ben Sullivan, really, there were moments in the game where he played like a point guard, like very much so. One play, it was a 3rd and short, and he shovel passed it to one of the Northwestern players to convert it. And so Northwestern just being scrappy. They did everything they could to stay in this game, and their game plan was successful. They were tied with Ohio State or leading up until the 8-minute and 44-second mark in the third. Very successful game plan by Pat Fitzgerald and company. Unfortunately, they fall to 1-8. 1-5 in conference. Ohio State's 9-0, 6-0 in conference with games games hosting Indiana, playing at Maryland, and hosting Michigan are up next for Ohio State. For Northwestern, the Wildcats play at Minnesota, play at Purdue, and then host Illinois to close out the year. So this game, listen, it was windy, it's rainy. I'm not going to necessarily count this. I'm not going to largely penalize Ohio State for their performance, even though despite the wind and the rain, yes, Ohio State at points looked lethargic on defense and offense, and the reasons for that are mainly situational. Northwestern was running an offense that was very hard to prepare for. Wildcat only running the football which you don't really plan for a team only running the football. Northwestern only had 17 pass attempts and 59 rushing attempts. Very run-heavy team. Ohio State, they had 26 passing attempts, 35 rushing attempts. So much more balanced game plan from Ohio State. This originally because the wind and the rain worked in Northwestern's favor, but as Ohio State leaned into the run game and they have the superior O-line, the superior running backs, and they still could use some elements of the pass game too. Marvin Harrison Jr. had half of C.J. Stroud's completed passes, 5 receptions, and he had 51 out of the 76 total passing yards. So a lethargic game, but nonetheless a win for the Ohio State Buckeyes. Before I want to get into the analysis part and also get into some ramifications, talking about, the future onlook for both of these teams for the rest of the year and beyond, I want to encourage you to check out my merchandise store via the link in the description. If you're a Northwestern fan or an Ohio State fan, I have t-shirts for you in your school colors. They're very comfortable. They fit nicely. You can purchase them through the link in the description down below. If you're a fan of any of the Big Ten programs, there is a t-shirt waiting for you. And if you're not, or if you don't want to get a colored t-shirt, you can get black or white long sleeve t-shirts, tank tops, sweaters. There's even some coffee mugs for you guys to buy or stickers for your laptop. So if you do that, I'd really appreciate it to support the channel. But if you're not interested in looking at the merchandise page or purchasing merchandise, I encourage you to subscribe if you haven't already, like this video, and comment your thoughts on this football game down below. Would you penalize Ohio State for what happened in this game? Or do you think that the circumstances of the wind, the rain, Northwestern's game plan, which, a run-only attack, you see this with the triple option. It can be very hard to defend that. And you could see that it was hard for Ohio State to defend it early on. But at the end of the day, they got done what they needed to get done, and they held Northwestern for 0 of 4 on fourth down conversion. So a clutch defensive performance by Jim Knowles and company. This was a rainy, windy game. No one was passing the ball. And if they tried to, it was completely ineffective. You will never see C.J. Stroud go 10 of 26 for 76 yards or anything close to that ever again. You will never see it. It's just not going to happen. The wind, the rain, it all worked against him, along with Northwestern's defense having one of its best performances of the season. They were solid in coverage, whether it was man-to-man or zone, and they did their job. And most of the catches, which were by Marvin Harrison Jr., were clutch grabs. Sometimes they with, a coverage guy right on him. There were a lot of dropped balls as well by Ohio State wide receivers, whether it was Emeka Egbuka on what would have been a wide open touchdown pass or other things too. There were plenty of times where Ohio State wide receivers dropped the ball, which again can be contributed to rainy day, so slippery hands, and also can be contributed to the fact that maybe Ohio State was coming in here expecting for this to be a blowout and not really fully prepared for this game. But it didn't matter. 21-7, a win is a win, and again, given the circumstances, Ryan Day and his staff, they're going to learn from this and move forward. I think same thing with Northwestern and Pat Fitzgerald. He still does more with less. This team will probably go 1-11. Maybe they'll eke out another win. I'd be surprised if they eked out another win after that. I can't see this team going more than 2-10. Illinois is too good. Purdue and Minnesota are vulnerable, but I don't see Northwestern beating more than one of those two opponents whatsoever. But Pat Fitzgerald still does more with less. Absolutely. This team's injured. In fact, a tight end, or I think an offensive lineman or a tight end that Northwestern had was moved from the defense. No, it's the other way around. A defensive lineman for Northwestern was moved from tight end or some kind of exchange like that. The announcers were talking about it because how banged up they are. Northwestern, their depth chart, you look on ourlads.com, and I mentioned this, I think, in the preseason. There wasn't a whole lot of information on it. A lot of guys, Brandon Joseph, for example, like the better Northwestern players did transfer out, the more talented ones, and the NIL situation, transfer portal, the fact that, Pat Fitzgerald, he no longer has Mike Hankwitz as his defensive coordinator. After that 2020 season, a lot of, a DC that's been there for 13 seasons leaving is a huge change. Northwestern has not recovered from that. Their defenses have not been the same since Hankwitz left. Fitzgerald is doing all he can with the little amount of talent and the poor staff that he is provided with. And given that he makes some better moves in the postseason of this season and maybe the preseason of 2023, though by then most coaching changes and hires are made, Northwestern can get back to being that team who is, by talent, inferior to you, but they can out-scheme you and they can win by rock fighting. As John Johnson said from Corn Nation, he mentioned how Northwestern is a team that wins by rock fighting in their first and only win against his own Nebraska Cornhuskers. And that statement couldn't be closer to the truth. That is absolute fact. Northwestern, it's death by 10,000 paper cuts, death by 1,000 rat traps, whatever you want to call it. Ohio State and Ryan Day survived a possible scare. They're 9-0, 6-0 in conference. The way that they played here, they can probably beat Indiana, beat Maryland playing this way. And as a Michigan fan myself, I know Ohio State is not going to play in the same partially sloppy manner they played against Northwestern, but you can't expect to beat Michigan or beat Michigan by more than a few points, more than one score, if Ohio State plays close to the way they played today. This was not a great game by Ohio State regardless, which is why it's good that they escaped this game, because this is probably the worst performance this team has had all year. Part of it was situational, the wind, the rain, the weird scheme offensively by Northwestern that is just hard to defend, and I keep bringing it up because it's true. If there was no wind and no rain, Ohio State probably adds an additional 14 or 21 points at minimum, because the drop balls would have been minimized, the wind wouldn't have affected C.J. Stroud's passes, it wouldn't have been as close of a game if not for the wind and the rain. I am completely confident that would have been the case. Ohio State's ground game, though, they were able to win the game alone, and that's what is encouraging. That's the one encouraging thing from this game. Mayan Williams, with Travion Henderson out, continues to solidify himself as the better back. And C.J. Stroud, he couldn't pass, so what did Ryan Day do? They ran him. And C.J. Stroud had 79 rushing yards on 6 carries for 13.2 yards per rush, and he had a long of 44. Mayan Williams had 26 carries for 111 rushing yards, 4.3 yards per carry, and 2 rushing touchdowns. And Emeka Egbuka, 2 carries, 21 rushing yards, 1 touchdown, which was on a long of 15. In a 15-yard rushing touchdown and an end around. Brilliantly called play, well executed by Egbuka. And this ground game for Ohio State, look, it is against Northwestern. Northwestern is not a great team. They're not great defensively or offensively, but still seeing that Ohio State can ground and pound and win when the pass game is all but failing, that is impressive. It's great if you're a Buckeye fan. And they got a wake-up call win in Ryan Field, and can't state that enough. They got a wake-up call win because they're not playing this way for the rest of the year. I can guarantee you that. After the way this game was played, the fact that Northwestern took the lead at some point, even though it was early, that surprised me. When I saw it was the end of the first quarter and Northwestern was up 7-0, I couldn't believe my eyes. It's like, what? Northwestern's defense is like 85th in scoring They held Ohio State to 0, and they themselves scored 7. And I knew it was windy and rainy, the weather was off, but nonetheless, seeing the fact that Northwestern's offense, which is one of the least productive and worst in the nation, got on the board, that was fascinating. And the defense had issues, but many of them were caused by weird formations and plays. It's hard to defend the Wildcat at points. It's also hard to defend a team that's just going to run it, and a team that is well-disciplined, and a team that executes at a high level with what they have. Northwestern hasn't done that all year. They did it this year. Ben Sullivan he acted like a point guard at times. He made the correct throws. He shovel passed it a few times or sidearm passed it a few times. Made some great plays. Evan Hull would just churn his legs forward. He would never give up. And there were so many times where, whether it was Evan Hull or Cam Porter or any of the Northwestern running backs, there were so many times that it looked like they'd be tackled for a 5-yard loss, and they would escape. They'd find holes. They're well coached and disciplined, and at least for this game, they found holes where there were nothing and picked up 2 or 3 yards instead of being tackled for a 5-yard loss. The Wildcats put up an admirable effort. I'm not going to call them the Mildcats after the performance they put up in this game, though a 1-8 record certainly warrants that nickname. It just wasn't enough. They don't have a good enough passing offense. They don't have a good enough rushing offense. They don't have a good enough anything. They don't. Evan Hull is an extremely underrated running back. He's one of the Big Ten's best, in my opinion. Great receiver out of the backfield, great runner. He has elusiveness. He can juke people out. He can find holes where there are none. It's just too bad that he does not have an offensive line with any sort of competency. Too bad. And Pat Fitzgerald, he has to make roster and staff changes in the postseason. He has to. I think that you've had your OC and DC for 2 years. It's time to fire them, because it looks like they're going to go a combined 4-20 record in the 2 seasons that the OC and DC have been paired together. The OC's been here for 3 years, yes, but 2020 certainly looks like a fluke. That was far more of a defensive team than it was an offensive team. It's time for the coordinators to go, parts of the staff to go, clean house, bring in new names. Northwestern, the stadium that they've built, which cost hundreds of millions of dollars, shows they have the money to make some good hires. Pat Fitzgerald has all the resources that he can get. Good coach, there's no doubt about that, but he has to make some changes if this team wants to be successful moving forward. Ohio State 21, Northwestern 7. Close game. And at the end of the day, Ohio State was the better team, even if they didn't play as close to their ceiling as Northwestern did. And that's all I'm going to say for this video. If you liked it, make sure to hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video down in the comment section below. And if you're listening via Spotify, make sure to follow the channel. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.